Yeah, maybe.
Yeah.
It's very possible.
Okay, we'll be live in a few seconds.
Got a really bad hair day, so dust the hat. I hope you guys can make exceptions for the hat.
We're good with headgear here, don't worry. I'm just gonna double check the sound. Okay. All right. Okay, folks. All right. Thank you, Mustafa, and thank you, Mohammed, for joining us today on our part 2 of our anti-hate series that CASA is holding. My name is Sami Hassan, and I'm the Executive Director of CASA, and I will introduce our 2 speakers very shortly. But before we get started, I'd like to just acknowledge that the work of the Council of Agencies Serving South Asians takes place on traditional Indigenous territories of the Huron-Wendat, Haudenosaunee, and the territories of the Mississaugas of the New Credit. This territory is part of the Dish with One Spoon Treaty, an agreement between the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, and the allied nations to peaceably share and care for the resources around the Great Lakes. This territory is also covered by the Upper Canada Treaties. Today, Takarancho, the traditional Mohawk name of this area called Toronto, meaning a gathering place, and its surrounding areas are still home to Indigenous peoples, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to meet, work, and play on this territory as settlers. So as you know, today's session is on the state of Islamophobia, and we have Mohammed, Hashim, and Mustafa Ali from NCCM joining us to talk about this critical issue that we're seeing in our society. So Mustafa Ali, as NCCM Strategy and Government Relations Advisor, Mustafa focuses on government relations, public policy, advocacy, and strategic planning. Mustafa is the former city council candidate, political staffer, and experienced campaign manager. Most recently, Mustafa served as a stakeholder relations manager to the Premier of Alberta. Mustafa is also a public speaker and a celebrated community organizer with a wide range of experience in community mobilization and outreach, paying specific attention to civic engagement and fundraising. Also, I wanted to mention again, as last week we don't have enough time to say the full biographies of these really accomplished speakers that we have, but we will be posting them in the comment section of our video, so you can have a full read of their biographies. Mohammed Hashim is a senior organizer for Toronto's labor movement and an active leader in the Muslim community advocacy. He is a founding advisor to the Canadian Anti-Hate Network and Progress Toronto, and currently sits as a board member for the Urban Alliance on Race Relations and United Way of Greater Toronto. His crisis management work for the Muslim community was profiled in the Global Mail because of his involvement in a variety of high-profile events. And Mustafa was just saying that he's read articles that feature Mohammed Hashim, and we're all used to seeing Mohammed Hashim as being an advocate for the Muslim community. So welcome to the both of you on this series of conversations. And just before we start, I also want to give a bit of a context to people that are tuning in for the first time. The reason why CASA has taken on this conversation series is part of actually a larger portfolio, a larger project that we're working on with the Anti-Hate Community Leaders Group. And if you're interested in that, please get in touch with us and we can provide you more information on that. So we do this every Tuesday at 4 o'clock on our Facebook Live. And starting today, we'll also be posting it on our YouTube channel, and we'll send the link out to that for that as well. We received some feedback after last time that some people do not have access to Facebook or don't have a Facebook account. So for those people, we will be recording it and then uploading it afterwards on YouTube. And so each session is 30 minutes. And again, we want to be able to keep it short and concise and consistent, and really get some important conversation flowing during these 30 minutes. So because we only have 30 minutes, I want to get right into it. So Mustafa and Mohammed, any of you, both of you can take it on, or any of you can take it on. I know I gave a bit of your biography already, but if you can highlight a little bit about your experience in tackling Islamophobia, and also describing some of the trends that are happening right now in terms of what we're seeing in the community, what's happening in terms of the reactions to some of the events that are happening in the community, with the Muslim community. What are you doing, and what are your organizations doing in terms of tackling Islamophobia?
Go ahead, Mustafa. You go first.
Okay, for sure. So I think I'm here in my capacity as the government relations fellow for NCCM, and NCCM has been doing this sort of work for a really long time. Longer than I can remember, which may say a little bit about my age. And I think the work of Islamophobia has been around for a long time, and it's only increased and become more rampant post 9/11, as folks are very much aware. And in recent years, it's become emboldened in parts due to geopolitical factors outside of Canada, but also certain pockets within Canada that are feeling increasingly emboldened to come out and say the things that they're saying, and go after our community, among other marginalized communities. And so I think we've been really busy at NCCM. I was saying before the call started, I only started with the organization in March, but it feels like I've been here for years, based off of how much work is needed to tackle and combat Islamophobia, wherever it rears its very, very ugly head. And so I think prior to that, on a personal level, working in government in Alberta, we did a lot of work there, between government and the Muslim community. One thing I'm particularly proud of was, we followed Ontario on this one, but, it was a declaration of October being Islamic Heritage Month, and really leaning in to recognizing the contributions of the Muslim community within the Canadian context, and celebrating, the Muslim community that's been here as long as, the country has been a country. Right since independence, Muslims have been here in building Canada into what it is, and will be here until the very end. And so I think just recognizing that and celebrating that, I think, is important, because a lot of Islamophobia comes from a place of ignorance, right? And othering. And so the more we can do to educate people and bring people together, I think the better. And so again, I think it's really combating Islamophobia wherever rears its ugly head, but also working on that educational component as well. And so, folks like Asia from our organization does wonderful work to that end. And so I can probably go on, but I'll keep it to that.
Yeah, I started off doing work on Islamophobia back in 2015 because I thought Stephen Harper had crossed a line. I felt that political Islamophobia at the time was a political tool that the Conservatives were using to get elected and get reelected. And that's a trend that we've seen. That's a political trend that we've seen in many different places across the world, where politicians figure out that, hey, there's some room to be able to other a certain segment of the population, and then they use that and they stoke it again and again and again, both to inflate the confidence of their base, but also to ensure that they are seen as fighting something that is deserving of fighting. And so the war on terrorism, the post 9/11 world, we were the scapegoats that were ever present. I think that, you know, in terms of like the politics of Islamophobia, I think that there's a significant shift that's happened and is in progress of happening in terms of like the conservative movement, which was, you know, the primary place where Islamophobia or like political Islamophobia was manifesting. I think that's starting to taper down a little bit. I think that, you know, like the current leadership race in the federal conservatives is one candidate who's definitely stoking that, but there's other candidates who are saying no. In the previous leadership, that was not the case. It was just right across the board. People were, you know, openly trying to stoke differences. For me, my work has always been, you know, there's two ways of kind of dealing with Islamophobia. One is to go after and silence people who are just hateful, and the other is to help people feel like they can belong and they can actually own their own sense of pride and destiny. And I kind of like to focus on number two more so than number one. So I've been, you know, other than, you know, the crisis communications work that I've done, which has been involved with, you know, getting myself involved with, you know, different cases, different families and different like moments in time where I'm able to help, you know, manage a situation. But other than that, most of my work has just been empowering people and helping people feel a way to be connected.
Great, thank you both. And I do want to talk a little bit about something that's happening right now. We've been talking a little bit about that before, Mohammed. So we know that there are certain municipalities in Canada that have allowed certain mosques to broadcast the call for prayer just for the month of Ramadan during the evening prayer for 5 minutes or less. I know, Mohammed, you were involved in some of the advocacy around that. And we've seen a lot of backlash from the society for this, you know, leniency that was given to the mosque. So can you tell us a little bit about what is happening? What is the response from the society? You know, and how is the community reacting? What is the community feeling like when they're getting this backlash?
Yeah, I can start with that. And Mustafa, please jump in as you feel fit to do so. But you know, when Medina Masjid came up with this idea to say, hey, let's do this, they reached out to Paula Fletcher, the counselor in Toronto Danforth, and she said, yeah, let's figure out a way to make this work. And because her intention was to say, like, look, you know, people are going to be by themselves. I'm sure there's not going to be too many people that are going to be affected by this. I doubt many people are going to hear this even. But if people know that's happening, it'll make them feel a bit better. Nobody who I know who works within politics, political staffers and others, would ever want to advocate for an issue like this, because it's not a concrete win for the community. You know, getting online hate or different things like legislation around those things. That's what we should be fighting for, not for there to be, you know, a call to prayer. But it meant something to us when different, you know, municipalities said, go ahead. Because, you know, I remember one of my like aunts was dropping off food the other day and she said, you know, did you hear the adhan? And I was like, no, there's no mosque close by. She's like, yeah, nor have I, but you know, it's nice to know that it's happening. And I was like, that's true. And because it deepened her sense of belonging to Canada. Like this was allowable. That the Canada has embraced a portion of my identity that I feel pride in and connected to. And it was a symbolic gesture. But you know, it just goes to show you that like every time there's some advance in rights that are extended to the Muslim community or an assertion of rights, of previous rights, people freak out. And there was two groups that were kind of looking at like the opposition towards this one. And you know, one of them comes from like, you know, from a community that has had a long history of being persecuted by Muslims in Egypt, and therefore, you know, their sense of trepidation towards this was, it was triggering for them. They're like we don't want to deal with the same things that we were dealing back home. That's why we came here. I'm not excusing it, but I understand why that was feeling that way. And the other one was just pure, hatred towards Muslims. To say, there's an assertion of rights, we have to stop that. And to be honest, when I started with saying no one wanted to use any political capital on this issue, because it didn't really, it was just a symbolic one. It wasn't really an actual real one. But the moment the city councilors decided, hey, let's reconsider this, everybody and their aunt and their uncle was like, nah, you can't do that. You can't extend something nice and then just take it away. And then all of a sudden, everybody was just saying, no, we got to stop this from being reversed. And I think and I think councillors and the mayor in Mississauga were wise to be able to say, this is not, if we were to reverse our decision, it would actually show that we are prioritizing the voices of haters versus the original intention of providing comfort to people. And that would just look really bad on us. And thankfully they realized that midstream of their conversation and then put away the motion and just withdrew that.
Yeah, no, I would echo Mohammed Hashim's statement. I didn't think this was going to be a thing in the way that it's become across jurisdictions, from Mississauga to Toronto to, Edmonton and Calgary and everywhere in between. And so I think it definitely is a very powerful statement of inclusion, and one I think many Muslims identify with and feel empowered by. And so I think it's one of those things sometimes, for those of us who, are in that government relations sort of space and work in politics, it's one of those things where sometimes, where we can be caught by surprise of what we think the community needs and wants, and we focus on it. And because it is very important, right? But then the community is very much interested in something else. And, it's a very clear and obvious win here for everybody. And so I think this has been a really powerful statement that I think we're going to be celebrating for many generations to come. I think when we talk about COVID-19 to our children and our grandchildren, I think in that same breath, we're also going to be talking about that time the adhan used to be played from the mosques, and the mosques were closed. And so I think it's been a great experience on the one hand. On the other hand, it's also exposed, a very ugly underbelly of society. And I would say it's a very small minority, but it's a very loud and dangerous minority. We've had cases of somebody in Edmonton launching what he referred to as a Ramadan bombathon. We've had people surveilling different mosques. We had one case in Scarborough Mosque where someone in the comments said, this is something a well-placed bomb could resolve, right? And these things are becoming increasingly prevalent, and it's very concerning in the community to be threatened in that way, especially in light of what happened in the Quebec City Mosque, what happened in the Christchurch Mosque in Australia, and the increasing attacks on Muslims in places of prayer, which you'd expect to be the last place that'd be a source of violence. And so I think folks are a little bit concerned around what's going on, and it's sort of a two-sided story of inclusion, but also made to feel lesser than by a very loud and unfortunate, the dangerous community. And so I think we need to be, doing exactly what Mohammed Hashim had mentioned. We need to be empowering our community, supporting our community, but we also need to go after these Islamophobes and racists, and make sure they see the justice that they so badly deserve.
Great, thanks for sharing that. So just to build a little bit on the online hate piece, so we've been seeing like the backlash is mainly through these comments online. So any article that comes out about what the mosques are doing, there's 1,000 negative comments. So I'm like just thinking about the Muslim community, especially the Muslim youth that are reading these comments. What kind of impact does it have on their mental health? What kind of impact does it have on their identity when they see these kind of comments?
I mean, I think it's really hard for me to kind of talk about what kids go through, because I've had a number of very strong. Like I remember, like I was in Quebec City the day after the massacre, and right outside the mosque there was a young mom and a girl there who were there to pick up the 6-year-old girl. Was there, and they were there to pick up the car of their father, who was shot the night before while leading Salah at the mosque, and and talking to them about what Islamophobia, I mean, what their lives are going to look like, obviously is significantly different than what other kids are feeling over here. But I'm really that's what I really try to focus on in that moment and moments afterwards, is that I don't want people to feel like they can't belong here. And sometimes, like if like my modus of, if I know there's somebody who's a bigot, and there's a way for me to quietly make that situation go away, 99.9% of the time I use that methodology. Because on one end, I know that when kids hear about Islamophobia, they internalize it. They themselves feel like they shouldn't belong, or maybe they don't belong, or maybe they couldn't belong. And if the whole point of fighting Islamophobia is to build their sense of confidence and their belonging, then I try to just make sure, I try to avoid, unless it's absolutely necessary, to go public on things that expose that level of thinking, because I think kids carry it really deeply, really deeply. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think there is definitely an element that is internalized by folks when we're talking about experiences around Islamophobia and being made to feel othered. And I think the most dangerous of examples is when it comes from the leadership of the country or political leaders who lend credence or validity to some of these statements and play dog whistle politics. And I think back to a conversation I had with some young folks in Alberta around identity, and many of them, and this is many years ago, in a very different political climate and a very different, overall climate around attitudes around Muslims, and many of them felt almost incidentally Canadian simply because they felt their identity was hinged on other people's perception of them. And so long as they were Muslim, they were seen as not necessarily entirely Canadian, as if they had, some type of connection, to another country. And you look at, for example, the 2015 campaign around dual citizenship and how that disproportionately affected minority communities, and in particular Muslim communities. Those sort of things negatively impact how young Muslims feel at home. And I think this is exactly why we do the work that we're doing, so that we're combating any attempt to make us feel any less Canadian than our neighbors. Because like I said earlier, we've been here as long as Canada has been a country, and we're going to be here long after these people who would seek to reject us or hate us for the very fact of existing. We're going to outlive them as well. And so I think we need to continuously speak to the indigeneity of the Muslim community in Canada, and constantly fight back against Islamophobia, because the most dangerous aspect of it, and after obviously life, is that sense of homelessness and not feeling rooted in Canada.
I just want to quickly add to that. The fact is, it has been like this, and it'll likely be like this for a little bit of a foreseeable future for sure. Where as Muslims start to assert their rights, people will push back. And, like every time that happens, like I believe the best way to deal with that is lean into it. If people are if people are gonna come after you, fine. If it's the right thing to do it and lean into it. Because otherwise, if we start, just holding back our own sense of assertion of our own rights, that takes away from future generations. That takes away from today and from tomorrow. And to be honest, it's going to be, I've seen bloody carpets and bullet holes in a mosque, and after you see that, you realize that like it can't get much worse than this.
Mm-hmm.
But when you think about it, it may or may not, but we can't let that deter what needs to get done. So if there is a fight that is a political fight or a human rights fight, we need to be able to just say, no, this is wrong, and we need to stand up and fight it.
Great, thank you. That's a very important point. So in terms of the fight, like I always feel like within the Muslim community, there's a huge burden on our shoulders. What is the role of the non-Muslim allies, and do you think that our administrators, our government is doing enough?
Yes, I would say, there's two levels there. I think I often stress, a top-down approach, particularly when we're talking from the political perspective. We need to expect more of our political leadership. I think we need, them to actively combat Islamophobia and discrimination, generally speaking. And that really comes in the form of oftentimes legislation, right? So like Mohammed Hashim referenced earlier, things like online hate, what are we doing about that? Because, hate is really finding a home in many corners of social media. And so I think we need to be actively combating that. I think we also need to expect our leadership to be more active in condemning Islamophobia, whether that come from people within the party, elected officials, donors and supporters. I think oftentimes there's a sense or a perception that political calculations are being made. And I think in this day and age, we need to wholeheartedly condemn any form of discrimination, and it really needs to come from the top. And so I think, politically speaking, I think that's what needs to be done. I think in terms of allyship from the general Canadian society, I think there's a lot that can be done. I think to plug NCCM, make a donation and support organizations like NCCM and other organizations that are combating hatred and discrimination. I think those sort of things go a really long way. I would also say speak out when you see discrimination, and lend your voice to combating Islamophobia. And I think similarly also make sure discrimination and Islamophobia is a ballot box question for you when you're going to the polls in any level of government. And I think that would also go a really long way in sending a message, both politically as well as to general folk that this is a community that matters, and these are issues that we care about, and Islamophobia will never find a home in Canada.
Yeah, I'll say two separate points on political leaders. Either you're sitting at the table or you're on the plate being eaten. And I firmly believe that it's so important for Canadian Muslims to get politically involved in all three political parties, despite my political affiliation. We run this program at Toronto City Council called the Muslim Youth Fellowship, which allows young Muslims to come, get trained for a couple of months, and then we give them a paid placement working for the city council, for like 10, 15 city councilors, plus the mayor. So they're there for 3 months, soaking in the environment of city council, working with political staffers. And the reality is that 99% of political decisions are done through political math. And the people who are setting those equations are in the room when those decisions are being made. And if our community needs to really move forward in a way where they are being included in those conversations, they need to grind it out and really start in their political activism right from the bottom and gain trust within the system to be able to influence it. In terms of allies, I work with a lot of community allies that are from the Jewish community and others, where they come in supremely helpful on just fixing things quietly so that things don't blow up in the media. And I think building those trusted relationships with different communities is supremely important. And it doesn't need to be with community leadership, it needs to be with just people, and building a sense of real trust and honesty of where our experiences are is so important. Because if you can't accept other people's positions of where they're at and sit with them, then why should they sit with you? And I think that going into it with an attitude where you just want to hear people where they're at allows them to kind of be honest and open with where they're at. And if we're going to deal with different communities that are problematic to Canadian Muslims, then my approach is to say, how do we create a path to break bread versus breaking windows. And I think that that approach has worked well for me, at least.
Great, thank you so much. So we're a little bit over time, but I do want to give you a few seconds just to give your closing thoughts if you have any.
Go ahead.
So I think, first off, thank you for having us, Samia. This has been a wonderful opportunity to obviously highlight the work that we're doing. And I think the work of Islamophobia, unfortunately, is going to be around for some time. And so I encourage folks to, follow NCCM and, another plug there, and try and support the work that folks are doing in the community to combat Islamophobia and discrimination. And I hope to be on this program again, hopefully, sharing some more good news as opposed to speaking to Islamophobia. But happy to be speaking to whatever.
I hope so too. Mohammed?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of allyship, I was going to say, there's two organizations that I work really closely with. It's the Urban Alliance on Race Relations, which has, it's an alliance of, people from many different backgrounds working together to address, hate and discrimination, and the Canadian Anti-Hate Network. Both the two organizations are not just Muslim, and the reason why I do that is because I'm not saying people definitely need to support NCCM and the work that they're doing, but in terms of your own personal growth, I think it's always good to be able to get outside of your own perspectives and learn and debate and argue and struggle with all types of different narratives that people carry and hold, because I think that's the mosaic of Canada that we really should be fighting for. And I think that, as we move forward to build a better understanding of Islamophobia, I think we're going to need a lot of people on our side. So getting out there and making sure that people understand, our perspectives, but also for us to understand where they're at is really important. And I just want to say thank you for having me. I've never actually sat on a panel about Islamophobia before.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, likewise, never.
That's really interesting. And I think, and I appreciate Mustafa that we will do more of these sessions. And I'm trying to see if we can do them on specific areas and really do a deep dive into them as opposed to doing it in broader categories. So, and Mohammed and I were speaking about doing a session on some of the movements towards far right within racialized communities and what that looks like and what we need to do about that. So thank you so much to the both of you, Mohammed and Mustafa, for joining us today. We'll be back next Tuesday at 4 o'clock. Our topic for next week is anti-Black racism and how that is playing out during the COVID-19 pandemic. And what we're seeing, what we're hearing, and what we can do about it. So thank you, and we'll see you next week.
Take care.
Thank you.
For having me.
Take care.